Welcome to the Creative Coast's video podcasts, featuring Savannah's top thinkers, business people, innovators, and creators. With host B. Ray, director of the Creative Coast, and program director Sharice Bennett. What follows are interviews running on the Creative Coast's website this month. You can check out the podcasts day or night at thecreativecoast.org/blog.
Brick wall after brick wall after brick wall.
Hello and welcome to the front porch. Today we're chatting it up with Steph Calvert. Welcome, Steph.
Hey, how you doing?
Super. So happy to have you.
Thank you.
So you're the founder of Hearts and Laser Beams.
Yes, I'm the owner and designer. Very small operation, which is mostly just me.
Fabulous. And tell me about the firm.
Hearts and Laser Beams is a design and illustration studio, and we help small business take their design, graphic design, web design, illustration, we help small business take it to the next level. A lot of times when small businesses are just starting out, they're kind of like a jack of all trades mentality where they do their own web design, they do their own flyers, their own logos, and all of that stuff. And
At
sometimes it works, and a lot of times it doesn't. And we end up coming in to help sort of
Brick
brush
wall,
things up
after
a little
brick
bit,
wall.
or if people come in and they just don't know what they're doing, like we help with that.
Right. And you have had this company for how long?
A long time, since 2006.
Good for you.
And we started as an Etsy venture where we were doing a lot of crafting, and I had full-time art and design jobs in Southern California, and so it was sort of my own creative outlet on the side. And in 2010, our son was born, and when I came off of maternity leave, the job had totally made a 100-degree turn, like while I was out on maternity leave, and it just like was so apparent the first day back that this is not going to work out. And the second I knew that, I started emailing everybody that I knew, like old bosses, old coworkers, like who's got work for me. And within 3 days, I was self-employed, and it was interesting because running a successful business is one part what you want to do, but it's also one part what the customer wants from you. And the crafting side of Hearts and Laser Beams never really did all that well because customers didn't want that from me. The second I started focusing more on design and illustration services, like all of my bills have been paid since I quit my job.
Good.
And that's been almost 4 years now.
Wow. And you've been a mom all the time taking care of your son. Isn't that great? And you also are a writer and a blog, so tell me about that.
I've been blogging since 2002, and it's interesting just how the blog has really changed voices over the years, because when I started it, I was in my early 20s, and it was a lot about like going out and just ridiculousness, and it's changed over the years, like just based on how my life has changed over the years, and now it talks a lot about running a business. Like there's small business tips on there, there's things about my kids obviously, and some tutorials and stuff like that. But it's just interesting, like it's kind of been a chronicle of my life over the past like 14 years or so.
And what happened in 2002? So this was quite a while ago, where you said, "Ooh, I want to be a blogger."
I moved to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and I was working at Oshkosh B'gosh for a while. Oshkosh, Wisconsin is a city of about 60,000 people, and it's beautiful, but it is boring.
Okay.
And so that's really why I started it, because I had nothing else to do.
What was the world of blogging like 12 years ago?
I don't really know. See, the funny thing is, like, I'm a blogger, but like I'm very like kind of in a bubble sort of blogger. Like I don't really follow a lot of other blogs, because like right now I don't have a lot of time. There's the business and there's the kids and family, and so like there's not a whole lot of time to like really keep my ear to the ground with it. And for me, a lot of my blog is just chronicling my life, and so it's not like it's a little bit more in a bubble. But there wasn't a whole lot of people that were blogging back then. But there was a lot of people that I knew in Wisconsin that were doing it, because we were all bored.
That's great. How many people do you think have followed you for all those years?
It's grown a lot.
Okay.
Right now, it's sort of exciting because if you look at Alexa.com, they rank all of the websites, the millions and millions of websites out there. And currently, Hearts and Laser Beams out of the millions of websites, we are ranked in the top 400,000 worldwide, and we're in the top 60,000 in the U.S.
Wow.
So that's like, it's exciting because it's like, it's been a great way for people to find my site. And then once they come to my blog and they read a couple of posts, they start clicking around and, oh, you're an artist and designer. Let me check out what you do.
Right.
Yeah, so it's been great for getting people to find out about the business.
So what percentage of your clients are local versus?
It's a very small percentage. The nice thing about working remotely and just doing things like web design is you can do it anywhere. And a lot of my client base, because I'm originally from Southern California, a lot of the client base is still Southern California, but I have clients all over the U.S. And I have one client in England, but I do have a few clients that are here more local. And most recently, Elizabeth F. Thompson is a real estate attorney in Savannah, and her website, eftlaw.com, just pushed that live about a week ago. So it's nice, like there's people all over, but we are starting to hit some people that are a little bit more local as well.
And as a creative from Southern California, what is it like creating your business here in Savannah?
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it so much. Yeah, we live out in Guyton, which is like little small town, about 25 minutes outside of downtown Savannah. And it's amazing because we just have all these trees, and it's country, and it's beautiful, and it's quiet, and anytime we need a big city fix, Savannah is right here. And I went to SCAD, and so I love Savannah. Obviously, because like I wanted to come back here ever since. But it's been so nice that like the trees are green here and the people are nice here, and it's amazing.
Wonderful. And you have the 2 children?
We have 2 kids, yes. We have Phil, who is going to be 4 in September, and Joy she was born in March of this year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see little creatives coming out of these personalities?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay.
You know, Joy, I mean, she's 4 months, so a lot of what she does now is that's kind of it. And she developed this new sound like over this past week. Have you ever seen Dumb and Dumber?
I haven't.
Okay. There's a part in Dumb and Dumber where Jim Carrey is in a van and he asks his buddy, you want to hear the most annoying sound? And then, I'm not going to do it for you because it's terrible.
Okay.
But that sound, that's her cry right now.
Oh, right.
And it's like Jim Carrey is right there screaming in my face. I'm like, dude, where did you even get this from? But our son Phil, because he's in the office with me all day, like he loves to paint, he loves to draw. And at 4, he does these things, and like they're amazing paintings, like the colors that he uses and like the stuff that like, I'm gonna paint a tunnel. And it's just this really cool, like he paints this cool tunnel, and he has access to all kinds of cool art supplies because of what I do. And he just runs with it, and it's so amazing to watch him just explore that.
Isn't that great? Wow. Well, Steph, thank you so much for being part of the Creative Coast and part of the Front Porch. And
Thanks for
part of
having me.
Savannah.
This is awesome.
It was great. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Front Porch. Today we're chatting it up with Vihan Lankshman. Welcome, Vihan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Vihan, we have you here all summer at the Creative Coast. Such a pleasure. Already you've been a big help, but how did we get so lucky? What brought you to come spend your Savannah summer here?
Well, I didn't know too much about the Creative Coast like before this summer, but I knew that I wanted to spend part of my summer just being immersed in the local community because I grew up in Savannah. I love it so much, and I just wanted to do something and I'm pretty interested in technology and entrepreneurship, and then just through some people I heard about the Creative Coast, and I met with B, and then I'm lucky to be here this summer, and it's been awesome so far.
Great. And where are you when you're not in Savannah?
I just finished my second year at Stanford out in California, and it's been good so far. And then so that's pretty much where I've been between Savannah and California, basically.
So what was that transition like? You grew up in Savannah and you're graduating from high school and you're saying, I have the whole world, let's go, and you chose Palo Alto.
Yeah, it's been a little overwhelming, I think, because one, the distance is quite large, so I think making that adjustment was a little tricky, but more than anything, I think I'm just finally getting used to just like not being in high school and just having so many cool opportunities out there and just figuring out just how to manage like all these different options that are out there. And I think it's been an interesting experience, definitely been a lot of different like ups and downs along the way, and I think that's also a cool lesson. I think being here over the summer learning by interacting with entrepreneurs is how, like, you know, one door may close, but there's so many other doors you keep
Great.
trying. And I think that's been a lesson I've learned over and over, and I think it's been cool to be here and just learn from so many people and hear their stories as well.
That's a great thing to hear, because I'm sure for a kid growing up in Savannah and achieving the chance to go to a school like Stanford, to some of us it may seem like you've never had a door close, that you may be the person who has only had everything happen perfectly. But what you just said is actually you've maybe had some doors shut and you've had to overcome that.
Yeah, one of the really interesting exercises that I had in one of my classes freshman year, and I know you've written an article about this too, was that we had to write a failure resume,
Right.
which was like basically a list of like things like didn't work out in your life or things where you fell short. And I guess for a bunch of Stanford students, like in their like third month, people were thinking, this is weird, you know, why would I have to do this? I'm used to bragging about my accomplishments. I'm not used to failure. But I think doing that exercise was really powerful in realizing that it contextualizes things and just makes you know, more eager to get back out there. And I think I still want to keep updating that, like, you know, as I go along, because I
great.
think it's a cool thing to have. It puts things in perspective, and I think it was a cool exercise to have like early on.
Wow, I hadn't thought about making sure that you have an updated failure resume. I love it. So, well, in what ways would you encourage someone growing up in Savannah to kind of reach beyond Savannah and maybe end up in California or another place to have an impact?
I think it's really amazing like how small the world is. I think because you can Skype with anyone pretty much, you can reach out, and I think the easiest way these days is probably just using social media. I think there's absolutely like nothing wrong with just, you know, reading about somebody cool and just sending them an email or something, or trying to reach out that way. I think there's so much going on here, but you're right, there's also so much going on in the rest of the world too. And I think just with the, like, you know, using social media or technology, there's nothing stopping you from just reaching out. And I think people appreciate that too. I think people, you know, are extremely busy for the most part, but not everyone will not respond to you. And I think just reaching out like that can be a cool way.
Have you had a personal experience where you've kind of just reached out to someone you thought was interesting through social media and had a decent response?
Not really, not that I can think of right now. I think on campus, I think I've reached out to professors before, which is kind of like that, but not exactly.
Great. Do you have a favorite class?
I think I can give you two answers. It's hard
Great.
to choose what's my favorite class. I think one of my favorite classes was Introductory Computer Science, which is a huge class. I think like 600 people took it last year alone. But it was awesome because the professor was super energetic and he got everyone really excited about coding and about what you can do with computer science, and all the assignments kind of proved that. Like, we wrote a program that could decide where to optimally put hospitals in a county, and we wrote another one that found like the shortest path through like a trail on the mountain, and it just really hammered it home that you could solve problems with computer science. And I think, and the one quote that I always took away from that class was, he said that computer science isn't really about computers. I thought that was interesting. He said a computer scientist looks at a computer the way an astronomer looks at a telescope. It's really just the way, just using that tool to get at what you really want, which is solving problems. And I thought that was a cool message.
Great. And so where in your life is computer science headed, do you think?
I definitely want to take more classes. It's something that I'm really interested in. I'm planning on, I think, studying it more in the future. I think right now my big obsession has been academically with math and statistics and doing stuff with that, and computer science is all over the place there. So I definitely think I'm going to take more classes.
Great. And so that was one of your favorite, but you wanted to talk about a second.
Yeah, my other favorite class I took this past year was called Philosophy and Literature, and was just talking about why we read books, why do we read tragedies even though they make us sad. And it was awesome to like talk about literature on such a fundamental level and try to understand, why do people write, why do we read these books, and like what impact does reading literature have on our lives. And it really hammered home a lot of like new insights for me, and I took away a lot from that class.
You must have read some books in that
Yes,
class.
a few books,
Okay,
yeah.
so did you have a favorite that you wanted to talk about?
Some books we read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which was
Okay.
really interesting because mostly of the way I think our professor interpreted it, because it's basically just 24 hours in this life of a high society British woman. And I think the most like mainline interpretation, the one I walked away from reading it, was that she's just someone who's extremely rich, doesn't really, care about anybody else. She's just going about her life planning this party. And then we come into class after reading it, and then we start talking about how that's not really the case because of this way that we can get inside her head. We see that she's actually really sympathetic towards people. Like she says, oh, we can't invite this person and this person, they wouldn't get along. And so he was making the argument that she's actually extremely compatible, because compassionate, yeah, because commendable, because she can be extremely empathetic. And I thought that was cool because I was walking in with one view, and then I just walked out of that class with another view.
I
And
love that.
I think those are the magical moments when somebody comes in and changes your mind just through reason, through examples.
I love that. Thank you. Lastly, quickly, you actually do some writing.
Yes, yeah. I love writing as well. Yeah, I think it's my favorite way of creative expression. I think I do a lot of sports writing, and I write op-ed columns for the Stanford Daily, the college newspaper, and that's been a great experience so far. I think it's really, pushed me to be more comfortable with my opinions and sharing them with others. And I definitely recommend writing to everybody because it's another form of expression. I think it's very different from playing an instrument or painting, but at the same time, it's another way of, sharing your voice with people. And it's been great for me since I got into it.
Wonderful. Well, Vihan, I'm so happy you share your voice with us, and in many ways have changed my mind about things. So thank you for being a part of the Creative Coast and today's Front Porch.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hello and welcome to the Front Porch. Today I'm happy to have you, Dottie Klutz, here, part of the team with the Front Porch, and you're going to talk to us about stories.
I am going to talk to you about stories. So, I really believe that we are the storytelling animals. We are the only animals on earth that have the ability to tell stories. And we don't really recognize the power of them, and yet we use them all the time. And I'm just like everybody else, that I believe in stories and love them and use them and tell them. As a child, my father told me stories. I grew up in a time when TV was not that important, and so stories were much more frequent, and lots of people made up stories. The elders in my family took it upon themselves to tell the ancestors' stories of people who had died before the children came along, and so we could understand and know them. I loved bedtime stories. I loved the stories my father made up, but I think the one where I just may not diverge, but became aware of more of stories is that I found that I loved true life stories more than I did fiction. So I found that I was reading more about true life stories than I was about any of the fictional books, and found them much more interesting and much more exciting and much more tragic and much more romantic than the made up stories.
And you bring that to your day-to-day work at hospice.
I do. I became a hospice nurse in 1993, and in hospice it's all about stories. And families were telling me stories, and patients were telling me stories, and staff was telling me stories. So in 2000, I talked to our then director, Judy Brunger, who was a visionary, and I said to Judy, can I be the person who keeps the stories? And she said yes. And so I created the story keeping program there. And that's where we go into our patients' homes and record them telling us their life stories. They get to say, this is who I am, and this is who I was, and this is what I did really well, and oops, this is not what I did so well, but this is what I learned from it. This is my message for you. These are my love wishes for you. And so it works very well to affirm that life that's getting ready to leave. Part 2 of it is that the patient's family and loved ones then get the story, because we record it on a CD and give it back either to the patient or to the family. So the family gets to hear those stories that maybe they had never even bothered to ask, and they get to hear it in that voice. And I think 2 things bring up a person back to life to us. One is their handwriting. I can look at my father's handwriting in fountain pen, and there he is, you know.
Wow.
And we're losing the ability to have the handwriting, which makes me really sad, because I think handwritten notes and seeing that handwriting is just whoa. And their voice. And of course, with what we do with recording it on CDs, they do have the voice. And I don't even think you need the video, I just think you need the voice. You can use your own imagination, which I think is the power of storytelling, is that when someone is telling you a story, you're adding your own imagination to it, and you're filling in on, maybe not even aware of it, but you are filling it in. So I think when you listen to someone's life story, you don't need that video, you just need that voice.
Wonderful. Well, I know a little bit about your personal story, not a ton, but you also have, part of it is a historic home that you have renovated,
Yes.
I think twice. Tell us about that.
We moved to Savannah in '77. I was raised on the Chesapeake Bay, so I'm a water girl. And I have never lived in a new house. I've always lived in an old house. My parents, always had them. When we first got married, we lived in old houses. And we were living in the historic district downtown, and this wonderful house on Tybee came up. Of course, that intrigued me because it was next to the water. And it turned out that it's a house on Officers Row. And Fort Screven was based at the north end of Officers Row. And there was a row of homes called Officers Row because that's where all the Army officers lived. And they would walk down the sidewalk in front of their houses and go to the very last house, and that would be their offices. The base doctor always occupied our house because the hospital sat on the other side of us. When we bought it, it was in really bad shape. It had been abandoned for about 20 or 30 years. Someone had bought it and tried to redo it, but really had not spent a lot of time on it. In its abandonment, the front door was missing and the chandelier, everything about it that was good was taken. So we dug in and started, and of course we did it as we could because we didn't have enough money to just go and do it at one time. It took us about 5 years to do it, and we were using it all the time as our beach house. Took us 5 years to do it, and a month before we were leaving downtown to move to Tybee, it burned.
Oh, wow.
And so, pretty bad fire. And so we had to start all over again, and so we restored it the second time. I really believe that because we have so many historical homes and older homes around us in Savannah, we forget how wonderful they really are. And we need to give accolades to the people who take the time and the money and the energy to restore them. It is no small deed to have that house passed on to you and that you're the stewardship for it as long as you own it, and then you pass it on. But how wonderful. I know that I live in a house where there were lots and lots of families, and because it was an Army house that just moved, people moved
Right.
on and on.
So it has its own story in a way.
It does. It has a ghost. We don't have time to go into it, but I really think it does have a ghost.
Wow. So what do you say to others as you recognize the need for storytelling, and yet you also recognize the loss, as you said, where there's more television now and there's less handwriting? What are ways that you encourage people to create stories, tell stories, share stories?
Well, I think obviously we have to begin with recognizing what they are and not just taking them for granted. And I think we just have to raise the level of consciousness that they are powerful and that they do wonderful things. In children, We schedule them for soccer, and we schedule them for violin, and we schedule them for whatever. Schedule them for Once Upon a Time. And the schedule means that child now has an hour that he doesn't do anything, but he does his imaginary work. He goes into Once Upon a Time. He goes to Never Never Land. He can do it with you starting with the story and saying, in your mind, finish it or act it out, or here's some crayons and draw it. But I think we need to start with the children. I think we need to we're always going to be, we're hungry for stories, even though we're isolating ourselves in the cars at the computer with these earbuds in our ears and stuff, but we're still hungry for them. We really are, and we are never going to stop telling them. But we just have to find different ways of doing it. And it may be that it has to be by going to the computer and graphically drawing out a story. That may be the way it is. It may be with Skyping, that you're a grandmother and you live in Savannah and your grandchild lives in Oregon, but you Skype by telling bedtime stories to that child. You have to make space for story. But when you do, it's very rewarding. I mean, it really is.
Great. Well, Dottie, thank you so much for being a part of us today and for sharing your story. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you. I love it. Thank you for believing in story.
For sure. Hello and welcome to the front porch. We are here today with Brent Buice of Georgia Bikes. Welcome, Brent.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
I'm delighted to meet you. Tell me about Georgia Bikes.
Sure. We're a nonprofit organization. I'm the only staff member, and our mission is to promote bicycling and to improve bicycling conditions throughout the entire state of Georgia.
Awesome.
And so we get the majority of our funding from the Share the Road license plates. Probably seen those around on cars. The extra money that people pay for those tags goes to the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, and they in turn award that money to us in addition to several other organizations around Georgia, including the Savannah Bicycle Campaign.
So your area of concern is all of Georgia, but you're located here in Savannah.
That's correct.
Isn't that great? And so what kinds of things are you worrying about every day? Lanes, loading, biking?
We look at, we have a national counterpart organization called the League of American Bicyclists, and when they're looking at a community, a university, a business, or an entire state in terms of it being bike friendly, they're looking at what they call the 5 E's, and that's education, enforcement, evaluation, engineering, and encouragement. And so we're really looking at all 5 of those things. And for a community like Savannah to be recognized as bicycle friendly, you have to have at least some modicum of accomplishment in each of those areas. And you need to be excelling in at least one of them.
Wonderful. Well, why don't we go ahead and break down each of the 5 areas and give us an example, because we can make some guesses, but why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So advocacy organizations like mine and like Savannah Bicycle Campaign, the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, and equivalent groups in Georgia, where we really excel is in the 2 E's of education and encouragement. We're the organizations that are out there telling people that bikes are vehicles, that they have the right to be on the road, that they need to act like that. So, bicycle and road safety is a two-way street, pardon the bad pun, but people riding bikes have to operate like vehicles, stopping at stop signs, being visible and signaling. But of course, the flip side of that is that people in much more dangerous vehicles, i.e. motor vehicles, need to be particularly cautious and conscientious when driving around vulnerable road users like people on bikes.
So you're talking about education and encouragement. Talk to me about the other E's.
Sure. So enforcement's pretty self-explanatory. That's law enforcement. And do they know and understand the state and local laws that pertain to the operation of bicycles, the rights of cyclists, but also the responsibilities and duties of motorists who are driving near and around people on bikes. And so one of our programs that Georgia Bikes does is we have a traveling workshop that's free of charge and provides continuing education credit to law enforcement agencies. It's called a post-certified class for Peace Officer Safety Training Council, and it basically covers all the state laws that have to do with bicycling in Georgia. I've done it here in Savannah, Chatham County, but that was a couple of years ago, so we probably need to do a refresher here, but I just completed one recently in Ellijay, Georgia, for all the traffic officers up in North Georgia.
Great. And are you only about the enforcement, or are you a little bit about like lobbying for better
Yes.
bike laws?
So on the encouragement side of things and on the engineering side of things, we do engage in direct advocacy. So outside of the Share the Road tag revenue, We also receive public support through member donations and the generosity of for-profit and even other nonprofit agencies through small grants. And we can use that public support to retain a lobbyist at the state capitol who works on legislative issues for us, like the 3 feet safe passing law that went into effect in 2011. We were the authors of that bill and worked with state legislators, and our lobbyist is the one who helped us shepherd it through the sausage making process and make sure it actually became the law.
Wonderful. So I feel like we've talked about 4 of the 5 E's.
Mm-hmm. So evaluation is probably the toughest to wrap your head around and the least sexy, but if you're going to be putting in bike infrastructure, and we hope communities are, and they increasingly are, we need to know, are people using that infrastructure? If so, how many? Where? And that really comes down to working with your local transportation office. We routinely and exhaustively count motor vehicles. You can see the pneumatic counters on the roads all the time. We have tons of data about where people are driving and why and how often and what quantities. We literally have no data about how many people are riding bikes, especially for transportation in Georgia.
Right.
I can say, though, and I'm proud to now be a resident of Savannah, because one of only 2 cities in the state that do any kind of bicycle traffic counts is Savannah.
Right. Well, we're pretty proud of our cat bikes, too.
Oh, absolutely, and you're the first in the state to have a bike share program on the ground.
So tell me about you. When did your personal passion for biking
Sure.
begin?
So I was a student at the University of Georgia in Athens, and through just different circumstances, mostly poverty, didn't really have easy access to a car, and started riding a bicycle. And I realized really quickly that while things were easy to get to by bike in the sense of how far away they were, that it was unnecessarily difficult and dangerous to ride a bicycle in Athens. And so I ended up finding the equivalent of Savannah Bicycle Campaign, which is called Bike Athens up there. And I went to one of their events called the Tour de Sprawl, where it was a group bike ride around Athens, but they had a series of speakers talking about the intersection of land use and planning and transportation and sprawl and all the impacts that has. Most of them negative in terms of how we've built our communities. And it really opened my eyes and gave me the vocabulary to think about some of these issues. And I was just really blown away by this event and this organization that was grassroots and all volunteer. So I walked up to somebody and said, how do I get involved? And they said, well, do you want to be on the board of directors? And so long story short, 10 years later, I was the president of Bike Athens, working, it was strictly volunteers. So my day job was at the university. And I was a daily bike commuter, but working in my free time with Bike Athens, and that ultimately parlayed into this job with Georgia Bikes.
So what is the 10-year vision for biking in Georgia?
Well, we want to be the #1 most bike-friendly state in the Southeast, and I think that's very achievable. We've got some pretty stiff competition, especially from Florida and Tennessee. Tennessee's DOT has really done a lot at the state level in terms of policies and funding to make building bike and pedestrian infrastructure easier, but we're gaining ground. So I want Georgia to have I want us to have the most bike-friendly communities. We currently have 7, which includes Savannah and Jekyll and Tybee Island, so down here in the coast. And I want us to also be recognized as the bike tourism destination, a place where people would want to come to ride their bikes, say, from Savannah to Columbus, and to have the infrastructure on the ground that would make that appealing and attractive, not just to old white guys in spandex, but to families from Japan and Germany who are used to that kind of thing and would love to come see Georgia's heritage, beautiful infrastructure, architecture. Currently that stuff's not on the ground, but our topography and climate are really favorable. There's no reason we shouldn't be pushing that, and that stuff is dirt cheap to build. I mean, bike infrastructure compared to even a mile of urban freeway, a famous way to succinctly describe that actually is from Portland, recognized as one of the most bike-friendly cities in the U.S. For the cost of 1 mile of urban freeway in Portland, they made Portland go from a car-centric city to the most bike-friendly city in the United States.
Isn't that great?
So
Wow.
1 mile versus hundreds of miles of bike infrastructure. You know, let's talk about which one is the better return on investment in the long term.
And health and everything
Exactly.
else,
It's
so.
just win-win-win all down the line.
Isn't that great? Well, Brent, what a delight to have you here. Thank you for your work and for being part of our podcast and for being part of the Creative Coast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good.
Do it again?